The scrub brush trembled in Eleanor's raw hands as she knelt on the inn's back porch, watching the carriages roll past toward the county fairgrounds. Through the twilight, she could hear music drifting down from the pavilion where tomorrow's grand ball would begin. Her knuckles were bleeding again, split open from the lye soap she'd used to scour the kitchen floors since dawn. "Ellie? Girl, you still out here?" Mrs. Thornton's voice cut through her reverie. "Those chamber pots won't empty themselves." Eleanor pushed herself to her feet, ignoring the protest of her knees. 6 months ago, she'd been the daughter of a prosperous merchant in St. Louis. Now she was scrubbing other people's filth for room and board, and grateful for it. The typhoid that took her father had also taken their fortune. Medical bills, funeral costs, and the creditors who descended like vultures. She'd fled west with nothing but the clothes on her back and her mother's wedding ring, which she'd been too sentimental to sell even when she'd gone 3 days without eating. Before we continue with Eleanor's story, I'd love to ask you to take a moment to subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. Your support truly means everything to us and motivates us to bring you more quality content like this. I'm curious, where are you listening to this story from today? The following evening, the Madison County Spring Ball transformed the livestock pavilion into something almost magical. Paper lanterns swayed from the rafters, and the local string band tuned their instruments on a makeshift stage. Eleanor watched from the kitchen entrance, hidden in shadow, as she balanced a tray of champagne glasses. Mrs. Thornton had conscripted every available hand to serve at the event. The inn was catering, and Eleanor's job was to remain invisible while keeping glasses full. "Is that him?" squealed a voice near Eleanor's elbow. 3 young women in silk gowns clustered nearby, oblivious to her presence. "Jackson Mercer? Oh my stars, he's even more handsome than they said." Eleanor's gaze followed theirs across the crowded floor to where a man stood near the punch table, looking distinctly uncomfortable in a dark suit that couldn't quite contain his broad shoulders. His sun-darkened face bore a day's worth of stubble, and his hand kept moving to his hip as if reaching for a gun that wasn't there. His eyes, a striking pale blue, scanned the room with the wariness of someone who'd rather be anywhere else. "My father says the Mercer Ranch is worth over $50,000, another girl whispered. "And Jackson runs it all himself since his brother died. Not a debt to his name. Mama says every unmarried woman in 3 counties will be here tonight," the third added. "She practically pushed me into this corset. Said this is my chance to become Mrs. Jackson Mercer." Eleanor felt a strange twist in her chest as she watched more women gravitate toward the cowboy like moths to a flame. He was handsome, certainly, the kind of rugged, weathered handsome that came from honest work under an open sky. But what struck her most was the trapped look in his eyes, like a wild Mustang corralled for the first time. "Mr. Mercer," a woman in purple silk materialized at his elbow, her fan fluttering. "I've been so hoping to speak with you. My father owns the Mercantile, and he mentioned you might need a new supplier for—" "Ma'am," Jackson interrupted gently, touching his hat. "I appreciate the thought, but I handle my own business arrangements." Of course. The woman's smile never wavered. "Perhaps you'd honor me with a dance? I do so love a man who knows his own mind." Eleanor turned away, heading back toward the kitchen with her empty tray. It wasn't her concern what happened to rich cowboys at fancy balls. She had dishes to wash and floors to sweep before she could collapse on her cot in the attic. The next hour passed in a blur of dirty plates and demanding guests. Eleanor's hands moved mechanically, scraping, scrubbing, drying, stacking. Through the kitchen window, she could see the dancing had begun in earnest. Jackson Mercer was being passed from partner to partner like a prize at a carnival, his expression growing more strained with each song. "Girl, those glasses won't fill themselves." Mrs. Thornton thrust another tray at Eleanor. "And try not to look like death warmed over. You're representing my establishment." Eleanor bit back a response and lifted the heavy tray, making her way back through the servants' entrance. The champagne sloshed dangerously as she navigated between clusters of gossiping matrons and preening debutantes. She'd almost reached the refreshment table when someone stumbled backward into her path. The tray tilted. The glasses slid. Eleanor watched in horror as crystal and champagne flew through the air, and directly onto the purple silk gown of Miss Constance Fairweather, daughter of the county judge. The music stopped. Every head turned. "You clumsy little wretch!" Miss Fairweather shrieked, staring down at her ruined dress. "This cost more than you'll earn in a year. Mama, make her pay for this." Eleanor's mouth went dry. She couldn't pay for a dress like that. She couldn't pay for anything. Mrs. Thornton would dismiss her. And then what? She'd be on the street, with winter coming, with nowhere to go and no one to help her. "I'm so sorry," Eleanor whispered, dropping to her knees to gather the broken glass with shaking hands. "Please, I didn't mean—" "Intent doesn't matter," Mrs. Fairweather snapped, swooping in like a bird of prey. "That dress was imported from Paris. You'll work off the debt or go to jail. Judge Fairweather, arrest this girl for destruction of property." The judge, a portly man with mutton chop whiskers, stepped forward with a satisfied smirk. Now, let's be reasonable. A girl obviously can't afford. I'll cover it." The voice cut through the commotion like a knife. Eleanor looked up to find Jackson Mercer standing over her, his pale eyes. "But surely you don't need to concern yourself with the help's accidents." "How much?" Jackson's tone left no room for argument. "Well, I suppose $200 would cover the dress and the inconvenience." Eleanor gasped. $200. She'd never seen that much money in her life. She tried to stand, to protest, but her hands were full of glass shards, and her vision was swimming with unshed tears. Jackson pulled a leather wallet from his jacket and counted out bills without hesitation. 200. Now are we done here, or do you want to humiliate this woman further? Mrs. Fairweather snatched the money, her face reddening. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean. Constance, come along. This ball has been ruined anyway." As the Fairweathers swept away in a rustle of indignation, Jackson crouched beside Eleanor. His hands, large and calloused, gently took the glass shards from her fingers. "You're bleeding," he said quietly. Eleanor looked down to see blood welling from a dozen small cuts on her palms. "I'm fine," she managed. "You didn't have to. I can't possibly repay you. Didn't ask you to." Jackson produced a clean handkerchief and wrapped it carefully around her worst cut. His touch was surprisingly gentle for such rough hands. "You work at the Thornton Inn?" "Yes, sir." "Name's Jackson." "Not sir." His eyes met hers, and Eleanor felt something shift in her chest. This close, she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the small scar on his jaw, the weariness that lived behind his steady gaze. "What's yours?" "Eleanor. Eleanor Hartley." "Well, Miss Hartley, how about we get you out of here before that dragon woman finds another reason to scream?" He stood and offered his hand. Eleanor hesitated. Behind Jackson, She could see dozens of women watching with barely concealed jealousy, their faces pinched with curiosity and resentment. Mrs. Thornton stood in the kitchen doorway, her expression thunderous. Taking Jackson's hand would only make things worse. But her palms were bleeding, her legs were shaking, and she was so tired of being afraid. She took his hand. Jackson pulled her to her feet with easy strength, then surprised her by not letting go. "Mrs. Thornton," he called across the room. "Miss Hartley's injured. I'm taking her to Doc Morrison to get those cuts cleaned. You can dock her wages if you want, but I'd consider it a personal favor if you didn't." Mrs. Thornton's mouth opened and closed like a fish. "Mr. Mercer, of course. Yes. Take care of yourself, Ellie." The cool night air hit Eleanor's face like a blessing as Jackson guided her out of the pavilion. The sounds of the ball resumed behind them, music and laughter and the whisper of silk, but it felt like stepping into a different world. Above them, stars scattered across the sky like spilled diamonds. "You don't need to take me to the doctor," Eleanor said as they walked down the dirt road toward town. "These are just small cuts." "Maybe, but I figure you could use the excuse to escape that circus." Jackson's voice held a hint of amusement. "Ha, God knows I needed one." "You seemed popular in there," Jackson snorted. "Popular like a prize bull at auction. Every one of those women was looking at my ranch, not me. Could have been anyone standing in that suit, as long as the bank account was the same." Eleanor glanced at him sidelong. In the moonlight, his profile was all strong angles, sharp jaw, straight nose, the hint of stubble catching the silver light. "And you're not interested in finding a wife?" "Not one who wants me for my land." Jackson was quiet for a moment. "My brother Nathaniel died 2 years ago. Pneumonia. He was the charming one, the one who was supposed to marry well and produce heirs and all that. I was just supposed to work the ranch and stay out of sight. Now, everyone expects me to fill his shoes, but I don't fit them. Don't want to." There was grief in his voice, old and familiar. Eleanor understood that kind of loss, the kind that changed the shape of your life forever. "I'm sorry about your brother, and I'm sorry you had to deal with those vultures tonight." Jackson's hand was still wrapped around hers, warm and solid. "How'd you end up working at the inn?" Eleanor told him. The words came easier than she expected, about her father's death, the debts, the desperate flight west. About arriving in Madison with 50 cents and her mother's ring. About Mrs. Thornton's grudging offer of work in exchange for room and board. About nights spent so tired she couldn't even cry, and days spent invisible to everyone who mattered. They'd reached Doc Morrison's office, but neither of them moved to knock. They stood in the street, hands still joined, and Eleanor realized she hadn't felt this scene in months. Jackson wasn't looking at a servant, or a burden, or a problem to solve. He was looking at her. "That ring you mentioned," Jackson said slowly, "your mother's. You still have it?" Eleanor's hand moved instinctively to her pocket, where the simple gold band lived. "Yes, it's all I have left of her." "Good, don't sell it." Jackson's thumb brushed across her knuckles, careful of the cuts. "Some things are worth more than gold." "I needed to eat," Eleanor said quietly. "The pawnbroker offered me $20. $20. Jackson shook his head. "You know what I think? I think you're worth a hell of a lot more than $20, Eleanor Hartley. And I think any woman who'd rather starve than sell her mother's memory is someone worth knowing." Eleanor's breath caught. She'd spent so long feeling worthless, a burden, an inconvenience, a mouth to feed, that Jackson's words hit her like a physical blow. "You don't know me." "No," Jackson agreed, "but I'd like to, if you're willing." Before Eleanor could answer, the door to the doctor's office swung open. Doc Morrison, a grizzled man in his 60s, peered out at them with knowing eyes. "Thought I heard voices. You two planning to stand in the street all night? Or can I look at those hands?" The doctor's office smelled of carbolic acid and whiskey. Eleanor sat on the examination table while Doc Morrison cleaned her cuts with practiced efficiency, asking no questions about how she'd acquired them, or why Jackson Mercer was hovering in the corner like an anxious hawk. "Nothing too deep," the doctor pronounced, wrapping her palms in clean bandages. "Keep them dry for a few days and they'll heal fine. Though I'd suggest wearing gloves for heavy work." "She'll wear gloves," Jackson said firmly. "I'll make sure of it." Eleanor started to protest that she didn't have gloves, but Jackson's expression stopped her. There was something fierce in his eyes, something protective that made her pulse quicken. "Mr. Mercer," she began once they were back outside. Jackson, I appreciate everything you've done tonight, but I can't. I don't expect." "What do you expect?" Jackson turned to face her, and in the lamplight, his eyes were the color of storm clouds. "Because I'll tell you what I expect, Miss Hartley. Nothing. I helped you because those people were wrong to treat you that way. Because I've got money I don't need, and you've got troubles you don't deserve. That's all." "That can't be all," Eleanor whispered. "You paid $200. You held my hand. You looked at me like—" She trailed off, unable to finish. Jackson stepped closer, close enough that she could smell leather and sage and something uniquely him. "Like what?" "Like I matter." The words hung between them, heavy with truth. Jackson's jaw worked for a moment, and then he did something that stole Eleanor's breath. He cupped her face in his hands, gentle as touching flower petals. "You do matter," he said roughly, "and I don't know why or how. But the second I saw you on your knees, picking up that glass with blood on your hands, something in my chest just cracked open. I'm not a romantic man, Eleanor. I'm a rancher. I deal in practical things, cattle and grass and rain. But standing here with you, I feel something I haven't felt since before Nathaniel died. I feel alive." Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. "We just met." "I know. This is crazy. I know that too." Jackson's thumb traced her cheekbone. "But I'm asking anyway. Come work at the ranch. I need someone to help with the house. Cooking, cleaning, mending. The work's hard, but it pays $50 a month, plus room and board. You'd have your own cabin, your own space, and you'd be away from Mrs. Thornton." "Why?" Eleanor managed. "Why me?" "Because you're real," Jackson said simply. "Because in a room full of women pretending to be something they're not, you were the only honest person there. You were working and bleeding and surviving, and that's worth more to me than 1,000 silk dresses." Eleanor wanted to say yes. Every fiber of her being wanted to say yes. But she'd learned to be cautious, to question generosity that seemed too good to be true. "And what do you get out of this arrangement?" Jackson's hands dropped from her face, but his gaze never wavered. "Peace," he said. "Someone who sees me instead of my bank account. Someone who understands that loss doesn't just heal because time passes. Maybe friendship, if you're willing to give it." "Just friendship?" A ghost of a smile touched Jackson's mouth. "For now. I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give, Eleanor. Just a chance to know you, to let you know me. The rest, we'll figure out if the rest even matters." Eleanor thought about the inn, the endless scrubbing, Mrs. Thornton's harsh voice, the attic cot that left her back aching every morning. She thought about the women at the ball, circling Jackson like sharks, seeing only what he could provide. And she thought about the way he'd looked at her bleeding hands, the way he'd said her name like it mattered. "I'll need to give Mrs. Thornton notice," Eleanor heard herself say. "A week, maybe 2. Jackson's smile broke across his face like sunrise. "I'll talk to her tomorrow, smooth things over. You just pack your things." "I don't have things, just the clothes I'm wearing and my mother's ring." "Then I guess we'll start there." Jackson offered his arm, formal as any gentleman at the ball. "Can I walk you back to the inn?" They walked slowly, neither wanting the night to end. Jackson told her about the ranch, 5,000 acres of prime grazing land, a herd of 800 cattle, a house his grandfather had built from timber hauled across 3 states. He talked about Nathaniel, about the laughter that had died with his brother, about learning to run the ranch alone. Eleanor told him about her mother, dead 5 years from consumption, about learning to make bread at age 12, about reading books by candlelight, about dreams of teaching school someday. She told him small things, how she liked thunderstorms, how she was afraid of horses but not cattle, how she could sew anything if you gave her thread and patience. At the inn's back door, Jackson hesitated. "I meant what I said, about you mattering." "I know." Eleanor surprised herself by reaching up to touch his cheek, feeling the rasp of stubble beneath her bandaged palm. "And I meant it when I said this is crazy. But maybe I'm tired of being sensible. Maybe I'm ready for crazy." Jackson caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her wrapped fingers. "Get some rest, Miss Hartley. I'll be by tomorrow to speak with Mrs. Thornton. And Eleanor? Yes? Thank you for giving me a reason to leave that ball." His eyes crinkled at the corners. "Best $200 I ever spent." Eleanor watched him walk away, tall and broad-shouldered against the moonlit street. Her hands throbbed where she'd been cut, but she barely felt it. She felt something else entirely, something warm and terrifying and utterly unexpected. Hope. The next morning, Eleanor woke to raised voices downstairs. She dressed quickly in her one spare dress, gray wool, patched at the elbows, and hurried down to find Jackson Mercer in Mrs. Thornton's office, his hat in his hands, and his expression carved from granite. "Absolutely preposterous," Mrs. Thornton was saying. "She's under contract to me for—" "No contract," Jackson interrupted. "You agreed to room and board in exchange for work. Eleanor's been doing that work. She owes you nothing more. I invested in training her. I fed her when she was starving. And she's worked like a dog to pay you back." Jackson's voice went dangerously soft. "Now I'm offering her better pay and better conditions. Unless you've got a legal claim I don't know about?" Mrs. Thornton's face flushed purple. She turned to Eleanor, who stood frozen in the doorway. "Is this what you want? To throw away steady work for what? To warm some rancher's bed until he gets tired of you?" The words stung because they echoed Eleanor's own fears. But before she could respond, Jackson moved between them like a shield. "Watch your mouth," he said quietly. "Eleanor's coming to work as my housekeeper, with her own cabin and locked door. What I'm offering is respect, which is more than you've shown her." "She can leave at the end of the week," Mrs. Thornton snapped. "And good riddance. I'll dock her final wages for the broken glasses." "You'll pay her in full, or I'll have a word with every rancher in 3 counties about how you treat your help." Jackson placed several bills on the desk. "Matter of fact, here's payment for her last week, plus extra for the trouble. Come on, Eleanor, we're done here." Eleanor grabbed her carpet bag, already packed with her meager belongings, and followed Jackson out into the morning sunshine. She was shaking, adrenaline and fear, and excitement warring in her chest. "You didn't have to do that," she said, as Jackson loaded her bag into a wagon hitched outside. "Yes, I did." Jackson helped her up onto the bench seat with careful hands. "No one talks about you like that. Not while I'm breathing." The ride to the Mercer Ranch took 2 hours, across rolling prairie dotted with wildflowers. Jackson drove in comfortable silence, occasionally pointing out landmarks. The creek where he caught trout, the grove where eagles nested, the distant mountains still crowned with snow. The ranch house sat at the end of a long drive lined with cottonwoods. It was bigger than Eleanor had imagined. 2 stories of white clapboard with a wraparound porch and real glass windows. Nearby stood a barn, a bunkhouse, several outbuildings, and a small cabin set apart from the others. "That's yours," Jackson said, pointing to the cabin. "Nathaniel used to sleep there when he wanted peace and quiet. It's got a stove, a real bed, and a lock on the door. Keys inside on the table." Eleanor climbed down from the wagon, her legs unsteady. The cabin was small but well built, with a stone chimney and real wooden floors. Inside she found a bed with a quilt, a table and 2 chairs, a washstand, and a small cast-iron stove. Wildflowers stood in a jar on the table, fresh picked that morning, she suspected. "I'll leave you to settle in," Jackson said from the doorway. "When you're ready, come up to the main house. I'll show you around, and we can discuss the work. No rush." But he lingered, his hand on the doorframe, looking at her with those storm cloud eyes. "Eleanor, you feel safe here?" The question was earnest, almost vulnerable. Eleanor looked around her cabin, her space, her sanctuary, and then back at the man who'd given it to her. "Yes," she said softly, "I feel safe." Jackson's shoulders relaxed. "Good. That's good." He turned to leave, then paused. "And Eleanor, you're not just the help here. You're a person. A guest. A friend, I hope. The men know that. The whole county will know that. Anyone treats you otherwise, you tell me. Understood?" "Understood," Eleanor whispered. After he left, Eleanor sat on the bed, her bed, and let herself cry. Not from sadness, but from relief so profound it hurt. For the first time since her father's death, she had a door that locked, a space that was hers, a choice about what came next. And outside, splitting wood in the yard, was a man who defended her dignity at a county ball and paid $200 the first week at the ranch, passed in a blur of learning and adjustment. The work was hard. Jackson hadn't lied about that. But it was different from the grinding servitude at the inn. Here, Eleanor had agency. She decided what to cook, when to clean, how to organize the pantry. Jackson left her largely alone, checking in occasionally to see if she needed anything, but never hovering. The ranch employed 4 hands, grizzled cowboys who'd worked for Jackson's grandfather. They were polite to Eleanor in a distant sort of way, tipping their hats when they saw her, but keeping their distance. She suspected Jackson had given them explicit instructions about proper behavior. What surprised Eleanor most was Jackson himself. He worked from dawn until dusk, mending fences and moving cattle, and dealing with 100 small crises that came with running a ranch. But every evening, without fail, He knocked on her cabin door and asked if she wanted to walk. They walked the property at sunset, talking about everything and nothing. Jackson taught her to identify bird calls and animal tracks. She told him stories from books she'd read, making him laugh with dramatic retellings of Greek myths. They were careful with each other, both aware of the attraction that hummed between them, but neither ready to name it. On her 8th day at the ranch, Eleanor was kneading bread dough when she heard shouting from the yard. She wiped her hands and ran outside to find Jackson and another man in a heated argument. The stranger was tall and thin, dressed in an expensive suit that seemed ridiculous in the ranch setting. "I don't care what you want, Mercer," the man was saying. "That water flows through my land now. I've got every right to dam it." "Hawthorne, that creek feeds into the river that runs through 6 other properties. You dam it, you'll kill grazing land for 20 families." "Not my problem." Cyrus Hawthorne smiled unpleasantly. "Maybe if you'd been more neighborly when I asked to buy your north section, we wouldn't be having this conversation. I'm not selling. That land's been in my family for... Everything's for sale at the right price, Mercer. You'll learn that." Hawthorne's eyes slid past Jackson and landed on Eleanor. "Well, well, is this the little maid everyone's talking about? The one you rescued at the ball?" Eleanor's skin crawled at his tone, but she held her ground. "Mr. Hawthorne, I heard you paid $200 for her," Hawthorne continued, his gaze insulting as it raked over her. "Bit expensive for hired help, don't you think? Unless the service is specialized." Jackson moved faster than Eleanor had ever seen him move. One moment, Hawthorne was smirking. The next, he was on his back in the dirt, with Jackson's hand twisted in his collar. "You apologize to the lady," Jackson said softly. "Right now." Hawthorne laughed, tasting blood. "Huh, make me, ranch boy, unless you want the sheriff to know about your live-in." Jackson's fist connected with Hawthorne's jaw, with a crack that made Eleanor flinch. The other man crumpled, groaning. Jackson dragged him to his feet and shoved him toward his horse. "Get off my land. Damn that creek and I'll see you in court. Come back here, I'll shoot you myself." Hawthorne climbed onto his horse, spitting blood. "This isn't over, Mercer. You'll regret crossing me." They watched him ride away in a cloud of dust. Jackson's hands were shaking. With rage or adrenaline, Eleanor couldn't tell. Blood dripped from his split knuckles. "Your hands," Eleanor said, moving closer. "Let me see. I'm fine." "No, you're not. Come on." She took his elbow and guided him to the pump, working the handle until cold water gushed out. Jackson winced as she cleaned his knuckles, but he didn't pull away. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "You shouldn't have heard that." The things he implied. "He's a pig." Eleanor's voice was fierce. "And I don't care what people think or say. I know the truth. That's enough." Jackson caught her wrist gently, stilling her movements. "Is it the truth? Because, Eleanor, I need you to know, what I'm feeling, it's not just friendship anymore. It hasn't been for a while. And if that makes you uncomfortable, if you want me to stop the evening walks and keep my distance, I will." But I needed to be honest. Eleanor's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. "What are you feeling?" "You." Jackson's thumb traced circles on her wrist. "I wake up thinking about you. Spend my whole day looking forward to our walks. Can't concentrate on the ledgers because I'm wondering what you're reading, what you're thinking. It's driving me half crazy, Eleanor, but in the best way. In a way that makes me remember what living felt like before everything got so damn hard." Eleanor wanted to tell him she felt the same way, that she'd memorized the sound of his voice and the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed, that she went to sleep thinking about his hands and woke up hoping to see his face. But fear caught the words in her throat. "I'm scared," she whispered instead. "I can't be hurt again, Jackson. I can't survive it." "Then I won't hurt you," he said it like a vow. "I can't promise life won't hurt you. That's not in my control. But I can promise I'll die before I'm the one who does. I can promise to be honest and gentle and patient as long as you need. And I can promise that what I see when I look at you isn't a maid or a debt or an obligation. I see a woman worth knowing, worth protecting, worth everything." Eleanor pulled her hand back, needing space to think. "Give me time?" "All the time in the world," Jackson said, even though his eyes said something different, something hungry and hopeful and almost desperate. That night, Eleanor lay awake in her cabin, listening to the prairie sounds. Coyotes sang in the distance. Wind whispered through grass. And somewhere across the yard, Jackson was lying awake too, thinking about her. She touched her lips, imagining what it would feel like to kiss him. Then she touched her heart, feeling how fast it beat at just the thought. Time, she'd asked for. But how much time did it take to know you were already falling? 2 weeks later, everything changed. Eleanor was in the garden harvesting vegetables when she heard riders approaching. 6 men, all wearing badges, led by a portly sheriff with cold eyes. Behind them rode Cyrus Hawthorne, his face still bruised from Jackson's punch. "Miss Hartley?" The sheriff dismounted. "I'm Sheriff Watson. I'm afraid I need to ask you some questions about your relationship with Jackson." Jackson appeared from the barn, his expression thunderous. "What the hell is this, Watson?" "Mr. Hawthorne here has filed a complaint," the sheriff said. "Says you paid money for Miss Hartley at a public event and brought her to your ranch under false pretenses. Says she's being held in servitude." "That's a lie," Eleanor said hotly. "I'm here by choice. Mr. Mercer offered me legitimate employment." "At suspiciously generous rates," Hawthorne interrupted smoothly. $50 a month for a maid. That's more than most cowboys earn. Makes a man wonder what services she's actually providing." Jackson took a step forward, murder in his eyes. But Eleanor grabbed his arm. "Don't," she said urgently. "That's what he wants." The sheriff cleared his throat. "Miss Hartley, I need you to answer honestly. Has Mr. Mercer ever forced himself on you, threatened you, prevented you from leaving?" "No," Eleanor said clearly. "Never. He's been nothing but respectful." "Can you explain the $200 he paid for you?" "He didn't pay for me. He paid for a dress I accidentally ruined. The Fairweathers can confirm that." "The Fairweathers aren't here." Hawthorne's smile was oily. "And reputations are delicate things, Miss Hartley. Perhaps it's time to admit you're in over your head. I'm sure we could find you more appropriate employment, in my household, for instance, where a proper chaperone could ensure nothing improper occurs." The implication was clear. Hawthorne wanted Eleanor for himself, and he was using the law to get her. "I'll see you in hell first," Jackson said softly. "That can be arranged." Hawthorne turned to the sheriff. "Well, are you going to protect this girl or let Mercer continue his exploitation?" The sheriff looked uncomfortable. "Mr. Mercer, I'm going to need you to come into town while we sort this out. And Miss Hartley, you'll need to stay at the hotel until—" "No." Eleanor stepped forward, her chin lifted. "I'm not going anywhere, and you can't make me. I'm a free woman with legal employment, unless you have actual evidence of wrongdoing, not just Cyrus Hawthorne's jealous fantasies. I'm staying right here." "She's right," one of the ranch hands said, stepping up beside Eleanor. Old Tom, the foreman, spit tobacco juice and fixed Hawthorne with a contemptuous stare. We've all been here since Miss Eleanor arrived. Mr. Mercer's been a perfect gentleman. This is, and you know it, Watson. The other hands moved to join them, a solid wall of support. The sheriff looked from them to Hawthorne, to Jackson and Eleanor, standing together, and his expression shifted. Mr. Hawthorne, he said carefully, I think maybe we've made a mistake here. Miss Hartley seems perfectly content with her situation, unless you have real evidence. This isn't over, Hawthorne snarled. He wheeled his horse around, nearly trampling Eleanor in his haste. Jackson yanked her back, his arm a steel bar across her shoulders. You come near her again, Jackson called after him, and there won't be enough of you left for the sheriff to find. They watched the riders disappear down the road. Eleanor was shaking, but not from fear, from fury. He tried to take me, she said incredulously, like I'm property. Hey, Jackson turned her to face him, his hands on her shoulders. You're not property. You're a person, and you just proved that to everyone here. I proved I'm not afraid of him, Eleanor corrected. But Jackson, he's going to keep coming. Men like that don't stop until they get what they want or lose everything trying. Then he's going to lose everything. Jackson's voice was granite. Because I'm not letting him take you. Not now, not ever. Eleanor looked up at him, really looked at the fierce protectiveness in his eyes, the set of his jaw, the way his hands trembled slightly where they touched her. This man had defended her honor, paid her debts, given her sanctuary. He'd asked for nothing in return except the chance to know her. Jackson, she said softly, I don't need more time. His eyes widened. Eleanor. I see you, she interrupted. Not your ranch or your money. I see a man who's been lonely and grieving and carrying more weight than anyone should have to carry alone. I see someone who deserves to be loved for exactly who he is, not what he can provide. And I see the person I want to build a life with, if you'll have me. For a moment, Jackson just stared at her, as if her words were a language he'd forgotten how to speak. Then he cupped her face in his rough hands and kissed her. It was gentle at first, tentative, questioning. But when Eleanor sighed against his mouth and wound her arms around his neck, something broke open between them. Jackson deepened the kiss, his hands sliding into her hair, and Eleanor felt herself melting into him, into the promise of what they could be together. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Jackson pressed his forehead to hers. Eleanor Hartley, he said hoarsely, you've wrecked me. Absolutely wrecked me. Is that a yes? Eleanor managed, her lips tingling. That's a marry me. Eleanor laughed, giddy and disbelieving. We've known each other 3 weeks. I don't care. Marry me. Let me spend the rest of my life proving I'm worthy of you. Let me protect you and provide for you and wake up every morning knowing you're mine. I'm already yours, Eleanor whispered. But yes, Jackson Mercer, I'll marry you. The ranch hands whooped and hollered. Someone fired a gun in celebration. And Jackson kissed her again, longer and deeper, until Eleanor forgot about Cyrus Hawthorne and gossip and propriety and everything except the feeling of being held by someone who saw her worth. They married a week later in the small church in Madison, with the entire town in attendance. Eleanor wore a simple white dress that Jackson had commissioned from the dressmaker. Nothing fancy, but clean and new and hers. Jackson wore his suit from the ball, though he fidgeted with the collar throughout the ceremony. When the preacher asked if anyone objected, Cyrus Hawthorne stood up in the back pew. I object. This woman is— Sit down, Cyrus, Judge Fairweather interrupted. The old man who'd wanted to arrest Eleanor at the ball now smiled at her kindly. My daughter informed me of what really happened that night. About how you've been harassing Miss Hartley ever since. You open your mouth again and I'll hold you in contempt. Hawthorne sat down, his face purple with rage. The ceremony continued. When Jackson kissed his bride, the church erupted in applause. Eleanor tasted salt and realized she was crying. But for the first time in over a year, they were happy tears. The reception was held at the ranch, tables set up in the yard, everyone bringing food to share. Eleanor danced with Jackson under the stars while a fiddle played, his strong arms around her waist, his eyes never leaving her face. I love you, he murmured against her hair. I know I haven't said it enough, but I do. I love your strength and your kindness, and the way you make me want to be better. I love you too, Eleanor said, for seeing me when I was invisible, for giving me hope when I'd forgotten what it felt like. That night, in the cabin that was now their home, Jackson carried Eleanor over the threshold and set her down gently. His hands shook as he unbuttoned her dress, his touch reverent. Go slow, Eleanor whispered. I've never— I know. Jackson's kiss was soft. We'll go as slow as you need. I'll die before I hurt you, remember? I remember. But Jackson, I'm not afraid. Not with you. They made love slowly, tenderly, learning each other's bodies with careful hands and whispered words. When Eleanor cried out, it was from pleasure, not pain. When Jackson held her afterward, stroking her hair, she felt something settle deep in her chest. She felt home. 6 months later, Eleanor stood on the porch of the ranch house, one hand resting on her slightly rounded belly, watching Jackson ride in from the north pasture. Behind her, the house gleamed. She'd spent the morning cleaning, and pride filled her at how different the place looked now. Flowers bloomed in boxes under every window. Curtains she'd sewn hung in cheerful patterns. The kitchen smelled of fresh bread and apple pie. Jackson dismounted and bounded up the steps, sweeping her into his arms despite her laughing protests. You'll hurt yourself, she scolded. I'm getting heavy. You're perfect, Jackson said, his hand moving to cover hers on her belly. How's our little one today? Restless, like his father. Jackson kissed her, long and sweet. Have I told you today that I love you? 3 times, but I'll hear it again. I love you, Eleanor Mercer. You saved my life that night at the ball. You just didn't know it yet. Eleanor thought about that night, about broken glasses and champagne-stained silk, about a cowboy who'd looked at a bleeding maid and seen someone worth defending, about how a moment of disaster had led to everything she'd ever wanted. You saved mine too, she said softly, and I'd break 1,000 glasses to find you again. From the barn, one of the hands called out that dinner was ready. Jackson helped Eleanor down the steps, unnecessarily, but she let him anyway, and they walked together toward the house full of warmth and light and family. Behind them, the sun set over the Montana prairie, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, and in the distance, if you listened carefully, you could hear music drifting from the county fairgrounds, where another ball was beginning. But this time, the most eligible bachelor in 3 counties wasn't there. He was home, where he belonged, with the woman who taught him that love wasn't about what you could offer someone. It was about what you became when you found someone worth offering it to. The winter came hard that year, blanketing the Montana prairie in snow that reached the fences. Eleanor stood at the kitchen window, watching the white world outside, while her hands worked automatically, kneading dough, chopping vegetables, stirring the pot of stew that would feed Jackson and the hands when they came in from checking the cattle. Her belly had grown round as a harvest moon. The baby was due in February, and Doc Morrison had warned her about traveling once the snows started. She was effectively trapped at the ranch until spring, but Eleanor didn't mind. She'd learned to love the isolation, the way the world shrank down to just her and Jackson, and the life they were building together. The door burst open, bringing a gust of frigid air and Jackson, covered in snow. His face was grim. "What's wrong?" Eleanor asked immediately, setting down her spoon. "Lost 6 head in the north pasture. Found them frozen in a drift." Jackson pulled off his gloves, his hands red with cold. "And there's more bad news. Old Tom rode out to check the line shack and found tracks. Someone's been using it." Eleanor's stomach clenched. "Hawthorne? Don't know. Could be drifters seeking shelter. But the timing?" Jackson shook his head. "I don't like it. Not with you here, not with the baby coming." Eleanor moved to him, taking his cold hands in hers and rubbing warmth back into them. "We'll be careful. But Jackson, we can't live in fear. Hawthorne hasn't bothered us in months. Maybe he's finally given up." "Men like Hawthorne don't give up." Jackson's voice was hard. "They wait, they plan, and then they strike when you're vulnerable." Over the next week, the situation grew worse. More cattle went missing. Not frozen this time, but driven off. Fences were cut. The water pump was sabotaged, requiring hours of work in sub-zero temperatures to repair. Someone was waging a war of attrition against the ranch, and they were doing it when Jackson was most distracted, most worried about Eleanor and the coming baby. "I'm riding into town," Jackson announced one morning. "Going to talk to the sheriff. See if he's heard anything. Old Tom will stay here with you and the other hands will work close to the house. You don't go outside alone, understand?" Eleanor wanted to argue, to tell him she wasn't helpless, but the protective fury in his eyes stopped her. "I understand. Be careful." Jackson kissed her, hard and desperate. "Lock the doors. Keep the rifle close. I'll be back before dark." But dark came and Jackson didn't. Eleanor stood at the window, watching the road, her hands clenched on the curtain. Old Tom tried to reassure her, but his own worry showed in the way he kept checking his pistol, the way his eyes scanned the darkness. At midnight, they heard hoofbeats. Eleanor ran to the door, relief flooding through her. But it wasn't Jackson. It was one of the hands, Sam, riding hell-bent for leather, with blood on his face. "They ambushed us on the road!" Sam shouted, half falling from his horse. 4 men, masked. They took Mr. Mercer. Said if we followed, they'd kill him. Eleanor's world tilted. Where did they take him?" "Toward the old mining camp in Devil's Canyon. Miss Eleanor, they said they'd trade him for the deed to the ranch." Old Tom cursed viciously. "It's Hawthorne. Has to be." He finally made his move. Eleanor's mind raced. Devil's Canyon was 15 miles away, across treacherous terrain, in the middle of a snowstorm. No one could navigate it in the dark except someone who knew every inch of the land, and the only person who knew it that well, besides Jackson, was... "I'm going," Eleanor said. "Like hell you are." Old Tom grabbed her arm. "You're 8 months pregnant, girl. You'd never make it." "I know a shortcut." Eleanor pulled free, moving to the map Jackson kept in his office. "Look, through the creek bed and over the ridge. It cuts 5 miles off the journey. I've walked it with Jackson a dozen times." In summer, old Tom protested. Not in a blizzard, not pregnant, not without Jackson. Eleanor's voice broke. Tom, they'll kill him if we wait for the sheriff. You know they will. Hawthorne wants this ranch, and the only way he gets it is if Jackson's dead and I'm compliant. The old cowboy's face crumpled. Miss Eleanor, if anything happens to you or that baby, the boss will never forgive me. If anything happens to Jackson, I'll never forgive myself. Eleanor was already moving, pulling on her warmest coat, lacing up her boots. I'm going. You can come with me or stay here, but I'm going. Old Tom stared at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Your mother must have been one hell of a woman to raise someone with your spine. All right, we go together, but we do this smart. They prepared quickly. Rifles, ammunition, warm clothes, rope. Eleanor tucked her mother's ring, which she now wore on a chain around her neck, inside her dress, close to her heart. If this was goodbye, she wanted it with her. The journey through the snow was brutal. Eleanor's back ached, her belly was heavy, and the cold bit through every layer of clothing. But she pushed forward, old Tom at her side, both of them following the familiar landmarks, even in the darkness. The creek bed where she and Jackson had caught fireflies in summer. The ridge where they'd watched eagles hunt. The grove where he'd first told her he loved her. Every step was a memory. Every memory was a prayer. Please let him be alive. Please let us reach him in time. They reached the mining camp just before dawn. The abandoned buildings loomed like ghosts in the snow, and through a broken window, Eleanor could see firelight. She heard voices, men laughing, someone groaning in pain. Jackson. Old Tom grabbed her arm before she could rush forward. Careful, he whispered. We need to see how many there are, where they're keeping him. They circled the building, counting men. 4 of them, just as Sam had said. Through a crack in the wall, Eleanor saw Jackson tied to a chair, his face bloody, his shirt torn. Cyrus Hawthorne stood over him, holding a piece of paper. Just sign it, Mercer, Hawthorne was saying. Sign over the ranch and we'll let you live. You can take your little wife and leave Montana. Start over somewhere else. Go to hell, Jackson spat blood. You'll never get that ranch. Eleanor will never. Your wife is 8 months pregnant in a snowstorm, Hawthorne interrupted. She's probably already dead, frozen in some drift. Sign the deed and at least you'll survive to find out. Jackson's roar of anguish made Eleanor's heart crack. He thrashed against his bonds, trying to break free, shouting threats and curses. Hawthorne just laughed. Looks like we'll have to do this the hard way, Hawthorne said, pulling out a knife. Start with the fingers. A man doesn't need all 10 to hold a pen. Eleanor didn't think. She raised her rifle, aimed through the broken window, and fired. The shot shattered the silence. Hawthorne screamed, the knife clattering from his hand as the bullet grazed his arm. The other men dove for cover, shouting in confusion. Next one goes through your heart, Hawthorne. Eleanor shouted, working the rifle's action. Let him go or I swear to God I'll make you regret ever hearing the name Mercer. Eleanor? Jackson's voice was disbelieving. Eleanor, get out of here. Run. Not without you, Eleanor said, and fired again, this time taking out the lantern, plunging the room into darkness. What followed was chaos. Old Tom burst through the door, his gun blazing. The 4 men scrambled for weapons, but they'd been caught off guard, unprepared for an attack. Eleanor kept firing through the window, her shots forcing them to keep their heads down, giving old Tom the opening he needed. Within minutes, 3 of Hawthorne's men were dead or wounded, and Hawthorne himself was on the floor, bleeding from his arm and begging for mercy. Old Tom cut Jackson free while Eleanor covered them, her rifle never wavering, despite the trembling in her arms. Jackson stumbled out of the building, and Eleanor nearly dropped her gun in her haste to reach him. He caught her, pulling her against his chest, his whole body shaking. "You're alive," he kept saying. "You're alive. You're here. You came for me." "Of course I came for you," Eleanor said fiercely. "You're mine. I protect what's mine." Jackson laughed, a sound somewhere between joy and tears. Then his hands moved to her belly, feeling for the baby. "Are you hurt? Is the baby?" "We're fine." "Oh, fine. But Jackson, we need to go." "The sheriff." "Already here." Sheriff Watson stepped out of the darkness, a dozen deputies behind him. "Got Sam's message and followed you up. Good thing, too, or I'd have missed one hell of a show." He looked at Eleanor with new respect. "Mrs. Mercer, you're either the bravest woman I've ever met or the craziest. Maybe both." "Both," Jackson and Old Tom said in unison, and despite everything, Eleanor laughed. Hawthorne was arrested along with his surviving men. The charges included kidnapping, attempted murder, and conspiracy to steal property. As the deputies led him away, he looked at Eleanor with pure hatred. "You'll regret this," he hissed. "Both of you will." "The only regret I have," Eleanor interrupted calmly, "is not shooting you between the eyes when I had the chance. Now get him out of my sight before I remedy that mistake." The ride back to the ranch took hours. Jackson insisted on holding Eleanor in front of him on the saddle, his arms wrapped protectively around her and their unborn child. They didn't speak much. There would be time for words later. For now, it was enough to be together, to be alive, to be heading home. When they finally reached the ranch, dawn was breaking over the snow-covered prairie. The house looked like a sanctuary, warm light spilling from its windows. Old Tom helped Eleanor down from the horse, steadying her when her legs threatened to buckle. "Inside with you," the old cowboy said gruffly. "You've had enough excitement for one lifetime." But as Eleanor turned toward the house, she felt something wet and warm between her legs. She looked down to see water and blood staining her skirt. "Jackson," she said, calmly, though her heart was suddenly racing. "I think the baby's coming." Jackson's face went white. "Now? But it's too early. Doc Morrison said February." The baby didn't get the message. Eleanor gripped his arm as a contraction hit, sharp and demanding. "We need Doc Morrison, and we need him now." What followed was a blur of activity. Sam rode for the doctor, while Old Tom and the other hands prepared hot water and clean linens. Jackson carried Eleanor to their bedroom, his hands shaking as he helped her out of her wet, bloody clothes and into a clean nightgown. "I'm scared," Eleanor admitted as another contraction seized her. "Jackson, what if something's wrong? What if the ride, the shooting—" "Don't," Jackson said fiercely, kneeling beside the bed and taking her hand. "Don't you dare think that way. You're the strongest person I know. You tracked me through a blizzard and saved my life. You can do this." "Together?" Eleanor whispered, gripping his hand as the pain intensified. "Together," Jackson promised. "Always together." Doc Morrison arrived an hour later, grumbling about fool women who went traipsing through snowstorms while pregnant. But his hands were gentle as he examined Eleanor, and his expression was reassuring. "Baby's coming early, but not dangerously so," he said. "You've got a fighter in there, Mrs. Mercer. Takes after the mother." The labor lasted through the day and into the night. Eleanor had never known pain like this. Waves of it, relentless and consuming. But every time she wanted to scream or quit or give up, Jackson was there. His voice in her ear, his hand in hers, his strength anchoring her when the pain tried to pull her under. "You can do this," he kept saying. "You're almost there. Just a little more, my love. just a little more. When the baby finally came, a girl with strong lungs and her father's pale blue eyes, Eleanor heard Jackson sob. Actual tears ran down his face as Doc Morrison placed their daughter in Eleanor's arms. "She's perfect," Jackson whispered, touching one tiny hand with his rough finger. "Eleanor, she's absolutely perfect." Eleanor looked down at her daughter, this miracle they'd created together, and felt something break open in her chest. Love so fierce it hurt. Gratitude so deep it had no words. "Hope," Eleanor said softly. "Her name is Hope, because that's what you gave me, Jackson. That's what we give each other." Jackson kissed Eleanor's forehead, then his daughter's. "Hope Mercer," he said, testing the name. "Welcome to the world, little one. Your mama's the bravest woman alive, and you've got some mighty big boots to fill." Over the next weeks, as Eleanor recovered and Hope grew stronger, the story of what had happened in Devil's Canyon spread through the county. People talked about the pregnant woman who'd tracked kidnappers through a blizzard and saved her husband's life, about the shot that had shattered a lantern in the dark, about Eleanor Mercer standing with a rifle, protecting what was hers. Some of the same women who'd sneered at her at the county ball now came to call, bringing gifts for the baby and apologies for their earlier behavior. Eleanor received them all with grace, though she never forgot who'd been kind when she had nothing, and who'd only come around now that she'd proven herself. One afternoon, Jackson found Eleanor in the nursery, rocking Hope, while snow fell outside the window. He stood in the doorway, just watching them, his wife and his daughter, the two people who'd given his life meaning again. "What are you thinking?" Eleanor asked, noticing him. Jackson moved into the room, kneeling beside the rocking chair. "I'm thinking about that night at the ball," he said. "About seeing you on your knees picking up glass, and feeling like something had just clicked into place in my chest, like I'd been waiting my whole life to find you." Eleanor reached out to touch his face. "I was so scared that night, thought my life was over, thought I'd never be more than a servant, never matter to anyone." "You matter," Jackson said intensely. "You matter more than anything. You saved my life, Eleanor. Not just in Devil's Canyon, though that too, but before that. You saved me from loneliness and grief and just going through the motions. You made me want to live again." "We saved each other," Eleanor corrected. "That's what love does. It saves us from the people we'd be without it." Hope stirred in her mother's arms, making small noises of contentment. Jackson reached out to touch his daughter's downy hair, his expression soft with wonder. "Think she'll grow up to be a hell-raiser like her mama?" he asked. Eleanor laughed. "I hope so. The world needs more women who aren't afraid to break the rules." "The world needs more women like you," Jackson said, period. They sat together in the fading light, the three of them, while the snow fell and the fire crackled, and the wind sang old songs across the prairie. Outside, the world was hard and cold and unforgiving. But inside, in this room, in this moment, there was only warmth and love and the quiet miracle of family. Eleanor thought about the girl she'd been, desperate and hungry and ready to sell her mother's ring for a meal. She thought about the night Jackson had looked at her and seen worth instead of need, about all the moments since then that had brought them here. And she thought about Hope, sleeping peacefully in her arms, who would grow up knowing she was wanted and loved and valued for exactly who she was. "Thank you," Eleanor whispered. "For what?" Jackson asked. for seeing me, for choosing me, for building this life with me. Jackson's answer was a kiss, soft and sweet and full of promise. "Best $200 I ever spent," he murmured against her lips. Eleanor laughed, remembering. "You keep saying that." "Because it keeps being true." Jackson's arms came around both of them, holding his family close. "Every day, every moment, it's true. You're the best investment I ever made, Eleanor Mercer. And I plan to spend the rest of my life proving I deserve the return." "You already have," Eleanor said softly. "You already have." Spring came to Montana, like a promise kept. The snow melted, revealing new grass and wildflowers. The cattle that had survived the winter grew fat on fresh grazing, and the ranch began to thrive again. Hope was 3 months old, growing stronger every day. She had her father's eyes and her mother's determination. Already she refused to sleep unless held exactly right, and her cries could wake the entire house when she would. But it was a good exhaustion, the kind that came from purposeful work and love freely given. One morning in late April, Jackson came into the kitchen where Eleanor was making breakfast with Hope strapped to her chest in a sling old Tom's wife had made. "Got a letter from the bank," Jackson said, his expression unreadable. Eleanor's hands stilled on the biscuit dough. "Bad news?" "Opposite, actually." Jackson set the letter on the table. "Seems Hawthorne's conviction means his property is being sold to settle his debts. The bank's offering us first rights to buy the land adjoining ours, the land with the creek he tried to dam." Eleanor wiped flour from her hands, her mind already calculating. "How much?" "Less than you'd think. Hawthorne's reputation is mud after the trial. No one wants to be associated with his holdings." Jackson paused. "If we bought it, we'd control the water rights for the whole valley. We could help the smaller ranchers, make sure no one ever gets squeezed out like Hawthorne tried to do to us." "Then we buy it," Eleanor said without hesitation. Jackson raised an eyebrow. "Just like that?" "It's a lot of money, Eleanor. It'll take years to pay off." "Then we take years." Eleanor moved to stand beside him, Hope sleeping peacefully between them. "We build something good, Jackson. Something that lasts, not just for us, but for Hope. For all the families trying to make a life out here." Jackson pulled her close, careful of the baby. "How did I get so lucky?" he murmured. "Luck had nothing to do with it," Eleanor said. "You paid $200, remember?" Jackson laughed, the sound rich and genuine. "Best investment I ever made." They bought the land. Over the next years, the Mercer Ranch became known as the most prosperous in 3 counties, not because Jackson squeezed every penny from his neighbors, but because he helped them succeed. He shared water rights, lent equipment, gave advice freely. And Eleanor became known for her charity work, for the schools she started for ranch children, for the way she welcomed anyone in need. Hope grew into a strong-willed girl who could ride before she could read properly, and who argued with her father about everything from cattle breeding to women's suffrage. She had Eleanor's fierce independence and Jackson's protective nature, and she drove them both to distraction and pride in equal measure. More children came, twin boys when Hope was 4, and another girl 2 years after that. The house that had once echoed with loneliness filled with noise and life and love. Jackson built additions, expanded the barn, planted trees that would grow tall enough for grandchildren to climb. On Hope's 10th birthday, the family held a party at the ranch. Half the county attended, including Judge Fairweather and even Miss Constance, who'd married a banker from Denver and was now pregnant with her first child. "I owe you an apology," Constance said to Eleanor, watching the children play in the yard. For that night at the ball, I was awful to you. You were scared, Eleanor said charitably. We all do foolish things when we're scared. Still, you were kind even when I wasn't. I'm sorry. Eleanor accepted the apology with grace. She'd learned that holding grudges took energy better spent on building something good. Later that evening, after the guests had gone home and the children were in bed, Eleanor and Jackson sat on the porch swing, watching the sunset. Jackson's arm was around her shoulders, and Eleanor leaned into him, comfortable and content. You know what I was thinking about today? Jackson said. That night at the ball, how miserable I was, being passed from woman to woman like a prize at a fair, wishing I could just disappear. He turned to look at Eleanor, his eyes soft. And then I saw you, on your knees, bleeding, surrounded by people who treated you like you were nothing. And something in me just woke up, like I'd been sleeping my whole life and suddenly opened my eyes. Eleanor remembered that night, the shame, the fear, the certainty that her life was over. I thought you were just being kind, she admitted, paying for the dress because you felt sorry for me. I was being selfish, Jackson corrected. I saw someone real in a room full of pretense. And I couldn't let you go. Had to find an excuse to keep you close. He kissed her temple. Smartest, selfish thing I ever did. I still think about what would have happened if we hadn't met, Eleanor said quietly. Where I'd be now, who I'd be. Don't. Jackson's arm tightened around her. You'd have survived. You'd have found another way. You're too strong not to. Maybe, but I wouldn't have been happy. I wouldn't have been loved. Eleanor turned to face him fully. You taught me that I was worth loving, Jackson, that I deserved respect and kindness and a partnership instead of servitude. That's a gift I can never repay. You repay it every day, Jackson said. Every morning I wake up and you're still here. Every time you laugh at my jokes or argue with me about fence repairs or hold our children. That's all the repayment I need. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out. Somewhere in the house, one of the twins cried out from a nightmare, and Eleanor heard Hope's voice, soothing him back to sleep. The sound made her smile. Hope, taking care of her brothers the way Eleanor had learned to take care of others. Think she'll remember this? Eleanor asked. When she's grown, will she remember being loved this much? She'll remember, Jackson said with certainty, and she'll carry it with her, the way you carried your mother's ring, as proof that love doesn't die just because circumstances change, as proof that she comes from people who fought for each other. Eleanor thought about her mother's ring, now on a chain around Hope's neck, passed down the way love and strength passed down through generations. She thought about the scared girl she'd been and the woman she'd become, about the journey from that county ball to this porch, from desperate survival to joyful thriving. I love you, she said simply. Every day, in every way, I love you more. And I love you, Jackson replied. My brave, brilliant, beautiful wife, my partner, my home. They kissed as the last light faded from the sky, and in that kiss was everything they'd built together. The ranch, the children, the life they'd carved from hardship and hope. It was a kiss that tasted like promise and fulfillment, like morning and evening, like the beginning and middle and forever of a love story that had started with broken glass and blood and $200. The best investment Jackson Mercer ever made. The greatest gift Eleanor Hartley ever received. And the legacy they'd pass down to their children and their children's children and all the generations that would follow. That love, real love, was worth fighting for, worth risking everything for. Worth $200, or 200,000, or everything you had. Because in the end, love was the only investment that never lost value, the only currency that truly mattered, and the only thing worth spending a lifetime to build. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale from. Are you listening at home, during your commute, or perhaps while working? Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. What did you think of Eleanor and Jackson's journey? Your feedback means the world to us.